My name is Ruth Malloy, and I was born in Brockville, Ontario. My mother actually was born in Canada. She was one of the few people of Chinese descent who was born in Canada, and she was born in North Bay. And her parents were one of the few people who had the mother, the wife, arrived in Canada. Very few women arrived at that time. And so she and her family were born, or her siblings were born in North Bay. My mother, she, having gone through it, taught us that this name calling that we were subjected to as children were by people who were ignorant. And so the onus was on them and not on us, and we grew up. Particularly after we came to Toronto and met other Chinese Canadians, that we were not second-class citizens. I always was interested in why people were doing this to us. And so that's why I took sociology and psychology in school. And afterwards, I had an opportunity to go to a workshop after I graduated. There was a workshop I read about in Washington, D.C. on how to deal with, in a nonviolent way, to fight against racial discrimination. It was organized by the Congress of Racial Equality and the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And the Fellowship of Reconciliation was a nonviolent movement. In fact, they both were. And they were both involved in, at that time, the integrating restaurants and swimming pools in Washington, D.C. So I was there a month, and I learned a lot about what was going on there, and we took part in demonstrations. We were an interracial group, and we went to swimming pools. Fortunately for me, we never got arrested. It was the first group in a series of annual groups that were organized there that never got arrested for some reason. I don't know. While I was there, the director, whose name is Wally Nelson, he was one of the most amazing and most consistent persons I've ever known. He asked me what's happening with the civil rights movement in Canada, and I didn't know then. So when I came back to Canada, I started asking questions, and just happened to talk to people in the mental health movement, Canadian Mental Health Association. I met Alvin Gamble, and Alvin said, "Oh, you should meet Sid Bloom." The Joint Labor Committee was the only group that was doing anything. And effectively, I went to meet Sid Bloom and asked him what was going on in Canada. And he told me about Dresden, and he asked me to take part. Hugh Burnett and I and Bromley Armstrong, we decided that we would be the test case. And then we also fortunately had Gordon Donaldson, who was a reporter of the Toronto Telegram, who was very, very much interested personally in this case and had been writing about it and writing about the discrimination in Dresden and the fact that they weren't serving blacks in the restaurant there. He came along as part of the test case. He and Sid went as the control group, and then we also had two other reporters from the Star. Mm-hmm. So it was very important, and this is what we learned in Washington, very important to have the press with us, and very important to have the government with us in terms of the law having just been passed. The Fair Accommodation Practices Law had been passed earlier that year. Well, we sat there for about 20 minutes, and we were not served. And it was obvious to me that Hugh was known to the people in the restaurant. Mackay, the owner of the restaurant, came out, and actually he was carrying a cleaver at that point, and was going like that with the cleaver. And he said, I think, if I remember correctly, he said to Hugh, "You know, Hugh, I can't serve you." I had never been involved with the labor with labor at all. So it was wonderful. Educational process for me to learn about the fact that they were doing it and why they were doing it. They were doing it because they didn't want there's unity in the labor movement. You don't want your blacks and your Chinese and everybody else fighting against each other within the labor committee, within the movement. Everybody has to be united in fighting against anything. I'm so glad I was able to see Bromley recently, and it's been one of the highlights of my life working with you, Bromley, because I've learned a lot, and it's actually been fun as well as very important and very satisfying, and you've taught me a lot.